Christina Yang is one of the most polarizing characters on Grey's Anatomy. You have those on one side of the divide who think that she's a mean girl masquerading as a surgeon with abysmal bedside manners and an ego bigger than the Atlantic, which they're kind of right. And also, to be fair, does describe a couple of doctors I have met in my heyday. Remind me to never tell you all about the one I accidentally went on a date with who decided to very graphically tell me how we botched a woman's cesarean section and ended it with a, but hey, it happens, right? And the dumbass proceeded to chuckle whilst I sat there trying my best not to puke in my food and stab him in the eye with a fork. Utter waste of space. Garbage man. What a garbage man. Ugh. And then there are those on the other side of the divide who believe that Christina Yang is God's gift to mankind. She can do no wrong and is absolutely perfect with zero flaws and a justification for her actions always. And whilst I personally understand why they would think that way, because Christina Yang is absolutely awesome and is my favorite character in Grey's Anatomy, I would die for her. I'm very aware of her flaws and how unlikable she is. That is the actual reason why I absolutely love her. Which is a great time for me to say, if this is your first time finding my channel, hi, I'm Noria, and I'm a sucker for unlikable women in media. Consider hitting the subscribe button if you haven't yet, and the like button if you end up enjoying the video. And speaking of videos, today's isn't about Christina Yang's flaws, of which, to be fair, there are many. Or her best qualities, of which I would gladly talk your ears off about them because each of them is incredible. No, today's video is focused on Christina Yang as a character, her clear desire to have 0 children so she can focus 100% on her career, and the unfortunate stain on her life that is Owen, who absolutely insisted on her having a baby and proceeded to try and make her feel terrible for not wanting that, which is a clear case of benevolent sexism if I ever saw one. Now, if you're an Owen Hunt fan, I would like to give you a double apology. One, for the unfortunate choice of Owen Hunt as your favorite character in Grey's. Of all the doctors you could have chosen, you picked him. Really? Really? Owen? Damn. The second apology is because I'm about to shit all over your fave. I am so sorry, I guess. Now, I do think before we start to talk about how Owen Hunt's push for Christina to have kids is a clear case of benevolent sexism, I think it's better for us to start with a definition of what that is. Because I'm sure that there are some people who believe that I'm thoughtlessly throwing the word around. Owen Hunt is clearly someone who saw the work ethics of April Kettner as a trauma surgeon, pushed for her to make trauma a calling, and advocated for her. Praised Teddy's skills as a cardio god when he brought her over to teach Christina to make Christina happy. Would a man who recognized and celebrated the worth and abilities of the women who were his co-workers be sexist? That's probably the thought you have in your head when you consider Owen's work with these women in this regard. And I totally understand your hesitation. Looking at it from that standpoint, Owen Hunt really is someone who advocates for the women in his life. And as such, some of you might think the sexist label doesn't fit for him. However, please note that to judge Owen on just his work ethics alone ignores the fact that how he treats the women he's in a relationship with also matters. And no, I'm not talking about his PTSD and how in the throes of it he choked Christina multiple times. He's a man who's recovering from the scars that war can leave on a person, and I understand why he reacts that way. Should Christina have been the one to bear that burden of helping him process his mental health issues as he battles his nightmares and traumas from the war? Nope. Do I understand why she would think that she should, though? Yes. Do I also think that she should have referred him to a therapist the first night she woke up with his hands around her throat? Absolutely. However, when I say that Owen Hunt is benevolently sexist, I'm using the definition of benevolent sexism offered by Campbell Lipper and Brenda C. Gutierrez in their joint book Encyclopedia of Adolescence, but specifically their chapter on sexism and gender-based discrimination, where they define it as a set of patronizing attitudes that are seemingly positive yet reinforce women's subordinate status. Components of benevolent sexism include protective paternalism, chivalrous expectations that men provide safety for women, complementary gender differentiation, women and men have complementary traits and roles, yet those associated with women are generally lower in status and power, e.g. nurturing caregivers, than those associated with men, e.g. assertive leaders, and heterosexual intimacy, women complete men in heterosexual relationships. And I do think that that definition is very key, as it does define much of Christina's relationship with Owen into points. And before you say it, yes, I know that Christina Yang is assertive. As that when she walks away from Grace Sloan Memorial Hospital, she is the cardio god. I am not disputing that. What instead I would like to focus on is the complementary gender differentiation and the heterosexual intimacy part of the definition, which I think does aptly capture Christina's relationship with Owen and why it is such a disaster. Now, prior to meeting Owen, Christina was well on her way to recovering from the disaster of her almost marriage with Preston Burke, who left her at the altar after she'd shaved off her eyebrows and, in his words, started to contort herself into someone that she wasn't so that she could be with him. It was right in that regard, though. Christina Yang is a woman who does tend to give pieces of herself away to the men she falls in love with. And we see her do this with Burke and then later with Owen when he comes into her life. It's the reason why I love her so much, and my heart breaks for her as the little girl with her hands on her dying father's chest as she slowly feels his heartbeat come to a halt. God, I love Christina Yang so much. But back to her and Owen. She gets together with him and things are initially going smoothly. They have the most rushed wedding shortly after the hospital shooting, where Christina is dealing with the PTSD of having to save Derek's life while the shooter holds a gun to her head, and she is terrified but wouldn't stop operating. And Owen is still dealing with his unprocessed trauma from the war. And just like anyone who could clearly see the disaster coming a mile away gets it, minutes after their wedding, Owen is hit with the realization and news that Christina Yang does not want to be a mother. A declaration that throws him off. Surgery is her entire life, and that is all she wants. Having a child to Christina would be unfair to the child, as she would always choose surgery over her baby, and no child deserves to be born into a world where they aren't cherished, wanted, and loved. That was her choice, and I love that for her. But see, this is where benevolent sexism creeps in, because Owen Hunt refuses to listen to the why of Christina's choice. He believes quite firmly that women should want to have babies and desire to be a mother, and thus sets out to try and convince, cajole, guilt-trip Christina into taking on that role and responsibility. And all of it is coded in this soft, this is what women want, why don't you want this as well? Don't you want to be a mother like other women language that is benevolent sexism. Because he's not laying down the law, but he's still trying to push Christina Yang into a responsibility that she doesn't want, because in his head, the clear gender roles means that Christina has to be a mother even if she doesn't want it. And even when Meredith meets with him to point out that Christina is just like Ellis and she truly doesn't want to have kids, Meredith tells him that she was raised by a Christina, by a mother who loves surgery more than her daughter, and she knows that Christina would never want to subject a child to that life of fate, as it would break her. Owen still refused to listen, because deep down he was driven by complementary gender differentiation that made him believe that his role was to be a father and a provider in their marriage, and Christina's role was to be a mother and a wife, and by the gods she was going to become that. It is why when Christina goes ahead to get that abortion, and although Owen initially acts like he's okay with it, when he finally, in a moment of rage, lets the truth of his feelings slip, he loses his shit and looks so betrayed as he hits her with the "you killed our baby" line. Basically disregarding that Christina never wanted to have children, didn't want to be forced into that role that he was desperate for her to pick up and step into. And that up until that point, he had been cosplaying as the attentive husband who had come around to what she wanted. Because ultimately, he was still stuck on what he wanted and how he felt that Christina had failed in her duties as the wife and should have been mother of his children. And so he lashed out at her, which, by the way, is Owen's go-to in his relationship with strong women who make the choice to not fit into his expectations of motherhood that he has of them. Because after he and Christina get divorced and Christina leaves, several seasons later, he gets with Amelia and marries her. And although she was initially excited at the thought of having a baby with him, upon remembering how her last pregnancy panned out, Amelia didn't want to have a baby anymore, which once again, Owen Hunt is pretty upset about and leads to a separation. I've seen so many comments with people who just not understand Owen's obsession with having babies, and for me, it's always been pretty clear. As much as he might pretend to be otherwise, as much as he might pretend to be one of the nice guys, Owen Hunt is still driven by this paternalistic desire to feel like a man. And for that to happen, he believes that fatherhood is something that is inherent to him and who he is. And so therefore, his expectations have always been tied to that desire to make sure that the women he's with fall in line with that, even if that wasn't what they previously wanted, all quoted in this language of care and concern that aches me and sends my senses tingling, because I know benevolent sexism when I see it. And this is also tied to how his character is someone who seeks to gain healing and a sort of completion with the women he's in relationship with. It's what mostly drives his refusal to initially get psychiatric help, because he had convinced himself that all he needed to heal from his trauma was Christina. Like she had a magical touch or something. Until, of course, he tried strangling her in his sleep, which had her locking herself in the bathroom and calling on Meredith for help. Whether it is Christina or Teddy or even Amelia, Owen's relationship with these women is often driven by this belief that he could find some sort of completion in them, that their love could heal something in him that has stayed broken ever since his military tours. And that mindset, that positioning of women as these beautiful ethereal creatures who can heal cracks in a man's psyche and pull him from the brink of whatever situation he's in, that belief, that right there is benevolent sexism. But that's just me and my opinions, of course. Would love to hear yours. Please drop them in the comments. Like this video if you've watched this far and haven't done so yet. Share it if you want. Support me on Patreon if you can. And until tomorrow's video, do remember, obsessing over the things you love, perfectly valid coping mechanism.